Alright, this is chapter 11, section 5, and it's on speciation through isolation. The key concept here is that new species are able to arise when a population becomes isolated. So the isolation of populations can lead to speciation. So when populations become isolated, we would say there's no gene flow. So what gene flow, all it means is just mating. That's all gene flow really means. And typically they're going to use it to describe like two different populations. So say you have, population A and population B, where if there's mating going on between the two, we would say there's gene flow. So if you got, people, having babies back and forth, we would say that's gene flow, otherwise known as, again, mating. However, say these populations can no longer mate or something, something happens so they can no longer mate, we would say there's no gene flow going on. So maybe these populations become isolated, say like, all of a sudden some like giant crack in the earth splits up these two populations from each other and you have no gene flow. And so when populations become isolated, this population can start doing its own thing and this population is doing its own thing. In other words, they have population B has their environment and population A has their own environment, and that's going to create these genetic differences because you're going to have an adaptation that allows population A to survive in their environment and an adaptation in population B that allows them to survive in their environment, and those adaptations may or may not be the same. And so over time, those adaptations, those genetic differences are going to add up. And what can happen if you get enough of those genetic differences, you can get what's called reproductive isolation. That's, again, it can occur when populations become isolated. And that's whenever members of the different populations cannot mate successfully. And it's the final step to becoming a separate species. So if you can't mate successfully, you're separate species. No mating, no, they're separate species. In other words, another way of saying that is no gene flow, then I'm talking separate species. And with reproductive isolation, there's going to be three types. The first one is going to be geographic, where there's a literal, like, physical barrier affecting your mating. And the second's going to be behavioral, and I'm going to go over these in the coming slides. Behavioral, where there's some sort of, characteristic that prevents you from mating. Maybe you don't speak the same language as somebody or something. And the third's going to be temporal, or maybe your mating times, when you interact with each other, aren't occurring at the same time. And so this process, when we become a separate species, that's called speciation. That's when you get one species becoming two species. One becoming two. Okay, so the first one, well, I called it number two, but one of the three is behavioral barriers. It's called behavioral isolation. And that's going to be differences in courtship. Courtship is like the wooing of someone. It's attracting your mate. This could be like, say you got a person here, and they're like, hablo inglés, and they're like, hablo español. And so, you know, no dating happens because, their languages don't match up. In other words, they have different behaviors that affects their ability to, have a relationship and to end up mating to have children. That's just one example. Not that, if you speak Spanish and someone speaks English, you can't, you know, get together and do all that. But it reduces the chance. If you can speak the same language, if you have, similar personalities, then you're more likely to get together and, become a couple or a thing or whatever and mate and have offspring. All right, next one is going to be geographic barriers. So, it's like you got somebody living here and a person living right here. There is a literal geographic barrier separating them. So like, just like, right? Like maybe they want to get together, right? But it's just, it's just there's just this big barrier preventing them from getting together. Okay. The final one is temporal barriers. Whenever you see temporal, that's saying time. Time, meaning that the times that you mate, it's a time of either of mating or just like being active. So maybe this person is a night owl, right? They're out at 2 a.m., but the other person is only out till 10 p.m. So, these two people, they're not going to see each other, right? Because 2 a.m. and 10 p.m. are different times of the day. And the temporal barriers, it's called temporal isolation. So yeah, as it says, timing of reproduction prevents mating. Okay, that's going to do it for this video.